Welcome back. I'm Justina from Practices Academy. This is the final part of our ACCA BT Corporate Governance series with Anthony Wolpert. To finish, Anthony brings it all together. Carroll's and Buchholz 4 responsibilities, Johnson and Scholes ethical stances, and how it all ties back to governance. Over to you, Anthony.
So in this video, we'll just take a bit more of an in-depth look into the responsibilities of organizations with regards to standards. Carroll and Buchholz designed a broad model setting out very high-level parameters in which organizations operate with regards to corporate governance and social responsibility. They posit that the corporate organizations' responsibilities can be broken into four groups: the economic, the legal, the ethical, and the philanthropic. And we'll take a look at each of these briefly and just wrap up the conversation on corporate governance and social responsibility in light of this model which has been presented. So the notion of an organization having an economic responsibility, as we've discussed, corporations' primary responsibility and primary attitude is to create profits for their shareholders, then in return both in dividends or otherwise in dividends and asset growth. But we've also discussed that a company has obligations towards its staff, which is a reciprocal responsibility, and that the staff are responsible for providing the manpower of keeping the organization going forward. And it also has responsibility for ongoing trade with customers and creating an environment that customers wish to purchase them back and then can take the goods generated by the organization and integrate that into their own value chains. Also the economic responsibilities a company has is to make contributions towards the society via tax and levies, and this allows the governments and government institutions to continue with running the country and the government, which is the broad environment in which the company finds itself. With regards to legal responsibilities, generally speaking, a company is required to stay within the legal requirements, the legal laws, the frameworks, etc., that exist, that affect it. This can be all the way from the tax legislation towards company law, towards employment equity law, etc. This obviously falls into the corporate governance sphere in that misrepresentations or accounting misrepresentation, for example, starts to fall outside of the legal ambit, and the corporate governance environment is put in place to ensure that a company would operate within the legal parameters. As you discussed, for example, the role of the company secretaries to make sure that all the submissions and reports that are required by law are made. And many companies also have legal departments which will guide the company within its operations through the day and make sure that it remains on the correct side of the legal requirements. It's also tied in with not only in terms of corporate governance, but just in terms of ethical behavior, in that companies are required to contemplate nuances within the law or areas which there might be interpretation in the law. The understanding of which is the correct direction for a company to go would relate back to ethical and legal assessment all at once. From a social responsibility, it all ties in as well. In terms of an ethical responsibility, the company might be required to act in a fair and just way to look after not only its shareholders, but its staff and members, which are directly related to the company, but also to take an ethical view on the entire environment in which it operates. So it can also be, for example, the actual physical environment, being the well-being of waterways, air pollution, etc. Again, it's ethical responsibilities is a very broad topic. It falls very often under the legal responsibilities, but can be taken further than as well, because it's not always on the hard and fast black and white of laws being broken or not, whether one acts in an ethical manner. In some instances, one may be entitled to do something but choose not to do it because ethically it is a better and a longer term benefit will be derived therefrom. Lastly, the notion of companies or organizations having philanthropic responsibilities means that it's asking organizations to consider that when levels are reached of sustainability within the company and maybe even of generous profit with the company on behalf of its shareholders would contribute back into the environment to ensure that those less fortunate than both the shareholders and staff members are assisted and given extra chances going forward. This is a very difficult area to legislate, but in many instances, many governments provide a reward and incentive for companies to invest in these areas. What you very often find is that if you have companies which are extremely successful and you have environments where the shareholders have gone on to become extremely wealthy, they might set up organization funds, trusts, which then take care of philanthropic responsibilities or activities on their behalf. Johnson and Scholes have commented on the ethical stance of organizations or people within organizations, but in many instances, the way that a company or an organization responds ethically should not be very much different from a person. They posit 4 different notions to be considered. That the short-term notion of ethicality, companies should be responsible for the short-term ethical stance, so on a day-to-day basis and then on an immediate forecast, that they should be acting in that way, regularly assessing whether their organization is meeting a short-term ethical stance, whereas you might suggest that a government would take a longer-term ethical stance to create an environment in which ethicality prevails. So the short-term shareholder interest is balanced between profit maximization but also ethical behavior. On a long-term basis, you'll find that it can take a longer-term view in creating a culture and a persona which is seen as being legal, representative, and acting in an ethical basis. The long-term view is built up of the short-term actions, but it also can take a long-term view that we wish to be a company, for example, that is seen to look after the environment, and it may, in a long-term sense, guide the company in new business directions. So, for example, if it's unsustainable for a company to continue without damaging the infrastructure or damaging the actual physical environment, to the long run, may choose to adjust its focus in terms of its product and its manufacturing. The concept that organizations have multiple shareholders and stakeholders, that some of them with direct link to the company, but it also sees that the broader environment in which it operates affects the organization, and it has a legitimacy and an obligation into that organization, into that environment, is important as well. And then the last step would be is where a company might take such a long-term view that it actually sees itself as a shaper of a society, in other words, leading other companies and organizations within its industry to act in an ethical way or to act in certain ways and put parameters and action plans for an entire industry rather than just an individual organization. Then you start to see organizations actually influencing society, influencing the well-being of people. So I hope these videos have been helpful in discussing corporate governance and social responsibility. I think it's critical to understand that the notion that shareholders, stakeholders, and others are important in the operations of the organization, and that the organization needs to take heed of this and to present itself in an honest and ethical way at all times, is vitally important for the well-being of an organization and for society at large.